The year was 1816, and London's winter season glittered with its usual parade of silks, scandals, and whispered ambitions. Beneath the golden chandeliers of Almack's assembly rooms, the city's most distinguished families gathered to dance away the chill, their laughter rising like fragile crystal against the air perfumed with roses and powdered wigs. Yet, amid the sparkle and sound, there stood one figure whose quiet presence neither demanded nor received the room's attention: Lady Evelyn Fairbourne. At 45, she possessed a beauty that no youth could imitate, soft amber eyes that had learned the cost of grace, and a poise honed not by vanity but endurance. Her gown was of dove-gray satin, modest but impeccably tailored, the color reflecting both her refinement and her restraint. She smiled, as she always did, that gentle curve of the lips that neither invited nor rejected conversation. Around her, young debutantes in pastel muslin fluttered like restless birds, while their mothers calculated dowries and titled matches with glances as sharp as blades. Evelyn stood apart, not by choice but by habit, as if her very stillness had become a form of invisibility. The violins began another waltz, a bright cascade of notes that promised delight for all but her. She turned slightly, feigning interest in the fresco above the musicians' gallery. She had learned long ago that to look expectant invited pity, and pity, in the ballroom, was worse than rejection. As partners were claimed and the floor swirled into motion, she remained near the mirrored wall, her reflection framed among the moving colors like a portrait forgotten by its artist. From across the room, a pair of matrons whispered behind their fans. "She was quite the darling once," murmured one, her pearls trembling as she spoke. "A shame how fortune fades with youth. 10 years, and not a single serious offer." The other replied with a sigh meant to sound sympathetic. "Perhaps her kindness is her undoing. Men prefer charm that flatters, not goodness that humbles." Evelyn caught their reflection in the mirror and lifted her chin, as though the insult had missed her entirely. Inside, she felt only the faint tightening of old wounds. It had been 10 years since she had danced. The last time, she still wore mourning black for her father, whose death had left her both orphaned and penniless. Yet the Fairbourne name carried just enough respect to secure her a modest townhouse in Bloomsbury and an endless chain of invitations she could neither decline nor truly join. She attended out of habit, perhaps pride, perhaps a quiet hope she dared not name. "Lady Fairbourne, what devotion you show to society," said Lord Ashcombe, bowing stiffly as he passed. His tone was polite, his eyes elsewhere. She inclined her head in acknowledgment, her smile practiced to perfection. "London's devotion is far greater than mine, my lord," she answered gently. He chuckled, already turning toward a younger companion. Beyond the crowd, near the marble columns, stood Alexander Hawthorne, the Duke of Ravenshade, a man who seemed to belong less to the ball than to its shadows. At 40, he was known in every circle and feared in most. His voice in Parliament commanded attention. His silence in company unsettled even the boldest hosts. Widowed these many years, he had become something of a legend, the silent Duke, a figure of power wrapped in grief. It was said he attended only to honor his sister's insistence that he be seen. Yet as he stood observing the dancers with an unreadable gaze, it became clear he saw more than the room intended him to. His eyes, a steel gray beneath the candlelight, rested briefly upon Evelyn. Something in her composure drew him, the way she stood against indifference with the dignity of one who refused surrender. He noted the stillness of her hands, the faint motion of her fan that betrayed the smallest trace of nerves. Around her, the world moved with shallow laughter. She remained unbent, as though she had made peace with solitude. Evelyn felt the weight of someone's gaze but dismissed it as imagination. Yet when she turned, her eyes met his across the crowd. The moment lasted only a heartbeat, yet it carried an odd, quiet recognition, two souls long accustomed to silence acknowledging the other's endurance. She lowered her eyes first, unsettled by the flicker of awareness it stirred. The dance ended. Applause rippled softly through the hall. A young officer approached her, encouraged perhaps by his peers' teasing. "Lady Fairbourne," he said, bowing with exaggerated gallantry, "may I claim the next?" His voice held more obligation than desire. Evelyn's instinct was to accept, out of politeness, out of gratitude for the gesture, but something within her resisted. She saw pity in his smile, and pity was a debt she would never owe. "I thank you, sir," she said gently, "but I find the air quite heavy. I shall sit this one out." Her refusal was graceful, final. The officer retreated, relieved. The matrons whispered again. The orchestra began anew, and once more she stood apart. From across the hall, Alexander observed the exchange. His jaw tightened, though even he could not have said why. For 10 years, he had avoided the dance floors of London, unwilling to endure the sympathy of those who remembered his loss. He had sworn that the pleasures of society were for others, those unscarred by grief. And yet, in watching Lady Fairbourne, he felt the faint stirring of something long thought buried. Curiosity, perhaps even respect. His sister, the vivacious Lady Arabella, followed his gaze. "Good heavens, Alexander," she whispered. "You stare as though she were a ghost." "Perhaps she is," he replied quietly. "A ghost of what this room pretends to possess." Arabella frowned. "You have become too philosophical for your own good. Dance, or you will be accused of brooding again." But he did not answer. His attention had returned to Evelyn. As the evening wore on, the crowd thinned. The scent of fading roses mingled with candle smoke. Evelyn gathered her shawl, preparing to leave before midnight, the hour when polite invisibility turned to ridicule. She had nearly reached the doors when the orchestra struck a final waltz, slow and wistful. She paused, unable to resist one backward glance. Alexander, standing at the edge of the floor, met her gaze once more. For a moment, the distance between them seemed to shrink, filled with the unsaid. He took a step forward, one deliberate, measured pace, and then another. Evelyn's breath caught, though she did not understand why. But just as he would have crossed the floor, a hand caught his arm. It was his sister again, whispering of some urgent guest. The spell broke. Evelyn turned away and descended the marble steps into the night air, her carriage waiting in the snow. As the door closed behind her, the sound of the waltz faded to a memory. Inside the ballroom, Alexander stood motionless, his hand still at his side. For the first time in a decade, he felt the faintest echo of something unfamiliar and unwelcome, regret. Outside, as the carriage wheels rolled over the frosted stones, Evelyn allowed herself a single thought before she banished it. Someone had looked at her, truly looked, and for that single heartbeat she had not been invisible. The weeks that followed the Almack's ball brought with them an early frost, and London's fashionable world withdrew into drawing-rooms filled with gossip and firelight. Lady Evelyn Fairbourne heard her name more often than usual, though seldom to her face. The matrons who once ignored her now offered polite nods, as if acknowledging some invisible shift. She dismissed it as nothing, an idle turn of society's wheel, but beneath her composure, curiosity stirred like the first crack of ice before a thaw. It began one afternoon when a white camellia was delivered to her Bloomsbury townhouse, wrapped in ivory paper without a signature. The flower was fresh, perfect, its fragrance delicate yet distinct. At first, she thought it a mistake, a token meant for another. But the handwriting on the folded card, "For kindness unforgotten," was unmistakably deliberate. Evelyn turned the card in her hands several times, puzzled. She had shown no particular kindness to anyone of late. And yet, the message lingered in her thoughts far longer than she cared to admit. By the following evening, whispers reached her that the Duke of Ravenshade had been seen purchasing rare blooms from Covent Garden's winter hothouse. She dismissed the notion as absurd. Men of his stature did not send flowers, least of all to women of her quiet circumstance. Still, when another gift arrived, a small, leather-bound volume of Lord Byron's sonnets, its margins marked with faint pencil lines, she found herself tracing the notes with a hesitant smile. One verse had been underlined twice. She walks in beauty, like the night of cloudless climes and starry skies. In a world where words were weapons and gestures often masks for ambition, these silent offerings unsettled her. They were not declarations, but recognitions, as though someone had noticed the life beneath her stillness. Yet she told no one. Even Mrs. Langley, her closest confidant, saw nothing unusual when she called for tea. Evelyn hid the tokens in her writing desk, as though afraid they might vanish if spoken of aloud. The Duke, meanwhile, carried his own uncertainty. Alexander Hawthorne had never fancied himself a man prone to sentiment. His grief, long buried beneath work and duty, had hardened into armor. Yet something about Lady Fairbourne's unspoken dignity haunted him. He had not approached her at the ball, and the failure weighed on him with surprising persistence. The flower, the book, the mended pair of ivory gloves he had ordered returned after she left them behind, these became his unspoken confessions, gestures too restrained to invite ridicule, yet too revealing to be ignored. London, however, ignored nothing. By the second week, the drawing-rooms of Mayfair buzzed with speculation. Lady Melrose declared that the Duke has finally lost his senses, first flowers, next a proposal, while Lord Ashcombe smirked that perhaps he seeks a governess for his conscience. Evelyn endured the murmurs with her usual grace, though the tightening of her gloved hands betrayed her unease. Scandal was a living thing in London. Once awakened, it seldom slept. One evening, as she prepared to attend Lady Stanhope's winter garden soirée, she hesitated before the mirror. Her maid, Anne, held up 2 ribbons, a pale blue and a silver. "The silver, I think," Evelyn murmured. "It offends no one." Yet when she pinned the camellia, now slightly faded, to her gown, she caught herself wondering if it would be noticed. The thought startled her. She nearly removed it. But then she did not. Lady Stanhope's house was a greenhouse of light that night, the glass ceiling glittering with frost. The guests moved among citrus trees and winter roses, their breath fogging the air. Evelyn found refuge near the fountain, where conversation thinned. She had just begun to think she might leave early when a shadow lengthened beside her. "Lady Fairbourne," came a voice, low and measured. She turned, and there he was, the Duke of Ravenshade. His dark coat was immaculate, his expression unreadable, yet his eyes held the same unguarded depth she had glimpsed that night at Almack's. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to narrow to the quiet between them. "Your Grace," she said, curtsying slightly, "London is most obliging, to let us meet again so soon." "Obliging, perhaps," he replied, "but hardly planned." His gaze fell upon the camellia pinned to her gown. "I see the flower found its way safely to you." Her composure faltered, though only slightly. "Then it was you." He inclined his head, neither boastful nor ashamed. "Forgive the intrusion. I had no wish to alarm you." "You did not alarm me," she said softly. "Only surprised me. That is a sentiment I have not inspired in many years." His tone was almost self-mocking, but his eyes were serious. "I thought you should know. The world may measure worth by youth or fortune. I do not." Evelyn's heart quickened, though she masked it behind civility. "Your Grace, such words are dangerous in a room that thrives upon misinterpretation." "Then let them misinterpret," he said quietly. "I have lived too long with silence. It has gained me nothing but echoes." Before she could reply, a cluster of guests approached, their laughter sharp as glass. The Duke stepped back, bowing slightly. "I shall not keep you." Then, lower, "But I hope you will keep the flower." She inclined her head, unable to trust her voice. He moved away, leaving her surrounded by chatter that suddenly felt unbearable. Every glance seemed to hold a question. Before long, she excused herself and sought the terrace, where the air was cold and mercifully empty. Outside, the night had turned to sleet. Her carriage waited beyond the wrought-iron gate, its lamps casting soft halos on the cobblestones. As she stepped toward it, a gust of wind caught her cloak. The sleet had turned the road slick, and her coachman struggled with the horses. Then another carriage halted behind hers, its wheels skidding slightly before coming to rest. The door opened and the Duke emerged, his coat dusted with snow. "Lady Fairbourne," he said, approaching, "permit me to see you safely home." "My carriage is sufficient, your grace. The roads are treacherous and London tongues worse," he answered. "Allow me the lesser sin." She hesitated. "If I accept, they will speak." "They already do," he replied simply. "Let them finish the story they've begun." Something in his calm defiance disarmed her. She allowed him to escort her to the waiting carriage. When he offered his arm, his touch was brief but steady, warm despite the chill. As they rode, neither spoke for several minutes. The city lights passed in silence, blurring behind the misted windows. At last he said, "You think me reckless." "I think you kind," she replied, "but kindness has ruined reputations before." He smiled faintly. "And silence has ruined hearts." When they reached her townhouse, he stepped down first, offering his hand. "Good evening, Lady Fairbourne. London will misunderstand us, of course. But I find I do not mind." She looked up at him, the snow catching in her hair. "You should mind, your grace. You have far more to lose." "On the contrary," he said quietly, "I have far less than they think." Before she could answer, he bowed and returned to his carriage, vanishing into the swirling snow. Evelyn stood beneath the gaslight, the camellia at her breast pale as moonlight. The city would speak by morning, of scandal, impropriety, folly. Yet as she stepped inside, closing the door behind her, she felt something she had not known in years, the faint, uncertain promise of being seen. The scandal should have extinguished all connection between them. Yet it did the opposite. Invitations once sent to Lady Fairbourne out of politeness now arrived from curiosity. London's finest wished to witness how she would weather disgrace, or perhaps how she would fall beneath it. But Evelyn did not retreat. Her composure remained flawless, her movements deliberate, as though each day were a lesson in dignity's endurance. Beneath that calm exterior, however, her heart stirred with conflicting currents of gratitude, apprehension, and something dangerously akin to longing. When the Duke of Ravenshade's crest appeared on an envelope delivered one frost-touched morning, her breath caught. The note was brief, written in his firm, unembellished hand. "You have endured much that you did not deserve. Allow me to offer one evening free of their eyes. Ravenshade Manor, Thursday next." No flourish, no plea. Yet the simplicity of it struck her more deeply than any sonnet could have. She debated for days. To attend was to court ruin, to refuse was to deny herself the truth of what she already felt. When Thursday arrived, she chose a gown of rose-colored silk, soft but unpretentious, and pinned a fresh camellia at her shoulder. As her carriage rolled beyond the city's grey fog into the countryside, she watched the frost gather on the glass and wondered if courage and folly were perhaps the same thing, merely named by others after the fact. Ravenshade Manor stood bathed in candlelight, its windows gleaming against the snow like embers in the dark. Within, music floated through the grand hall, not the raucous sound of London's assemblies, but a gentle waltz played by a small orchestra. To her astonishment, she found the ballroom already filled with guests, ladies and gentlemen of high rank, their faces marked by curiosity and caution. He had not summoned her alone. He had gathered the city's watchful eyes under his own roof. The Duke waited at the base of the marble staircase, dressed in black, his only adornment a silver crest pinned to his coat. When he saw her descend, he bowed, not the perfunctory tilt of a nobleman, but a gesture of deliberate respect. "Lady Fairbourne," he said, his voice steady though his eyes betrayed warmth. "You honor my house." "Your Grace," she replied quietly, her pulse betraying her calm. "I fear London will think I honor it too much." "Then London may think as it pleases," he said. "I am done letting its judgment dictate my life." His tone was not defiant, only resolute. "May I have this dance?" She hesitated. Around them, conversation hushed. The crowd's collective curiosity pressed close. To dance with him publicly was to seal every rumor as truth. Yet the way he extended his hand, unflinching, patient, left her no refuge in decorum. Slowly, she placed her gloved fingers in his. The orchestra began, a waltz slower than any she had known. His hand found the small of her back, guiding her gently into motion. The world receded. The murmurs dulled to silence. She dared not meet his gaze at first, fearing what might be revealed there. But when she finally looked up, she saw not triumph or pity, only quiet reverence. "You are trembling," he said softly. "Only because I have not danced in years. Then allow me to remind you." The rhythm carried them in perfect measure. Her gown swept like pale fire across the polished floor. His movements were measured, precise, protective. With each turn, she felt the weight of 10 lonely seasons fall away. She realized that while others sought admiration, he had given her something rarer, attention untainted by expectation. When the final note lingered and faded, no one applauded. The silence was its own kind of reverence. He released her hand slowly, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "They see what they wish to see. Let them." "I see you." Before she could reply, his sister approached, offering a polite smile that did little to mask disapproval. "Alexander, the guests are whispering." "They always whisper," he said without turning. "Tonight they may whisper the truth." He bowed again to Evelyn. "If you will excuse me, I would speak with you privately after the guests have gone." The remainder of the evening passed in a blur of restrained chatter and veiled glances. By the time the last carriage departed, the candles had burned low, and the snow outside lay deep and silent. Evelyn lingered near the grand fireplace, uncertain whether to stay or flee before courage deserted her. Then his voice came from behind her, low, steady, and far too near. "I hoped you would not leave without hearing what I have kept too long unsaid." She turned. He stood close enough that she could see the faint weariness at the edges of his expression, the vulnerability hidden behind the dignity. "If it is apology you intend," she said gently, "you owe none. I have survived worse than whispers." "No, not apology," he replied. "Confession." He moved to the firelight, its glow catching in his eyes. "When my wife and child died, the house became a tomb. I swore I would never feel again, lest I betray their memory. I built a life of silence, thinking it strength. And then I saw you, standing alone, unbowed in a room that would have devoured lesser souls. You reminded me that endurance is not absence of feeling, but mastery of it." Evelyn listened, every word carving space within her heart. "Your Grace," she said after a long moment, "grief may hollow a man, but it need not keep him empty. You are not faithless for wishing to live again." His breath caught, almost imperceptibly. "You speak as though forgiveness were simple." "It is," she said softly, "when it is given without demand." The fire cracked. Outside, the wind carried a whisper of snow against the panes. For a moment, neither spoke. Then he reached for her hand, not in possession, but in question. His touch was warm, steady, waiting for consent. "If I were to speak again," he murmured, "it would be only to you." Her reply came like the faintest sigh. "Then speak, Your Grace, but do not promise what silence cannot keep." A flicker of a smile touched his lips, half sorrow, half wonder. He lifted her hand to his lips, not as gallantry, but as vow. "Then I shall learn to keep it." She withdrew her hand slowly, her pulse unsteady yet her gaze unbroken. The storm outside deepened, echoing the tremor within her. "You risk much, Alexander," she whispered. "Perhaps too much." "I have risked nothing for so long," he answered, "that I have forgotten the taste of living." She turned toward the fire, unsure whether to believe him or fear the hope he offered. Behind her, his footsteps retreated, leaving only the sound of wind and the lingering warmth of his confession. Evelyn pressed a hand to her heart, half afraid it might betray her composure. The flames danced against the walls, throwing shadows like ghosts departing. She knew the night had changed everything, though neither of them had spoken the words that would make it so. The winter of 1816 fell harsh and unrelenting upon London. Snow blanketed the city in white silence, as though even the heavens had chosen to pause and observe the quiet scandal that now consumed the ton. Every drawing-room hummed with speculation. The Duke of Ravenshade intends to wed Lady Fairbourne. Some whispered admiration, more whispered disbelief. To many, it was a union that defied the arithmetic of vanity, a woman past her prime and a man whose grief had made him legend. Yet beneath the gossip's frost lay something that neither envy nor derision could thaw. A love that had grown not from impulse, but from understanding. Evelyn had not answered his confession that night, nor had he pressed her. Days passed, letters exchanged, brief, restrained, yet threaded with meaning. Each word he wrote bore the gravity of a man long unaccustomed to hope. Each reply she sent carried the grace of a woman terrified to believe in it. When, at last, an invitation arrived sealed with the Ravenshade crest, an invitation to a private gathering at the Duke's townhouse on Grosvenor Square, she understood the moment had come when silence must give way to truth. The evening was clear, the moon suspended like a polished coin above the rooftop. The carriage wheels hissed over snow, and the gaslights flickered against the frost. As she stepped down, the butler bowed deeply. "His Grace awaits you in the music-room, my lady." Inside, the house was hushed. Candles burned low in tall silver sconces, their lights softening the stern portraits that lined the hall. From beyond the open door came the faint murmur of a piano, hesitant notes, played not by a servant, but by the Duke himself. She paused on the threshold. He sat at the instrument, his back straight, his expression unguarded in that rarest of moments, when solitude met peace. He turned at the rustle of her gown. "Lady Fairbourne," he said, rising immediately. "You came. I said I would." Her voice trembled only slightly. "You play beautifully." "Poorly," he corrected, smiling faintly. "But the music keeps the ghosts quiet." She stepped nearer, her gaze drawn to the pale winter roses arranged upon the pianoforte. "And are they quiet tonight?" "For the first time," he said, "they seem content to listen." He motioned for her to sit, but she remained standing, her gloved hands clasped before her. "Your letter spoke of a matter of importance," she said softly. "You wrote that it could not wait for spring." "It cannot," he replied. His tone was calm, but there was a tremor beneath it, the tremor of a man who had rehearsed 1,000 words only to find none sufficient. "I once believed my life concluded with grief, that I might walk the rest of it untouched by anything resembling love. Then you appeared, quiet, steady, asking nothing. I found in your presence the one thing I had not expected to recover, peace." Her eyes glistened, though she said nothing. He continued, stepping closer. "Society would call this madness. They measure worth in years and novelty, not in constancy or kindness. But I have measured differently, and I find you rare beyond all comparison." "Alexander," her voice faltered. "I do not ask for admiration, nor for forgiveness of my silence," he said. "Only for the chance to give you the respect and protection that should have been yours long ago. If you would allow it, if your heart does not turn from me, I would make you my wife." The words hung in the air like music fading into stillness. She stared at him, every breath a battle between disbelief and dawning joy. Then, as if drawn by something greater than will, she removed her gloves and reached for his hand. "You speak of respect and protection," she said. "But what of love?" He looked at her then, with a tenderness that seemed almost too fragile for the world. "Love, my lady," he murmured, "is the reason I dared speak at all." She closed her eyes briefly, as if to steady herself. "You are asking me to step into a life that the world will scorn. Then let them," he said simply. "The world has never loved either of us as we are." A quiet laugh escaped her, choked with feeling. "You are braver than I." "I have been silent too long not to be," he answered. The clock struck 8, its chime echoing through the chamber. In that sound, something within her settled, like the final note of a long unfinished melody. She lifted her gaze and met his without fear. "Then, your Grace," she said with soft resolve, "you have my answer." He took her hand, pressing it to his chest. "Say it, Evelyn." She drew a trembling breath. "Yes." What followed was not the clamor of triumph, but the quiet of understanding, the moment when two lives, long resigned to solitude, found solace in one another. He kissed her hand once, reverently, and she felt the steady rhythm of his heartbeat beneath her fingers. When their engagement was announced the next morning, the Morning Chronicle called it a most curious match. Invitations vanished, acquaintances turned conveniently absent, yet the Duke seemed unaffected. He walked beside her in Hyde Park with the same composure he had worn in Parliament, his gloved hand never straying far from hers. And slowly, imperceptibly, the tone of the whispers changed. The Duchess of Ravenshade, as she was soon called, became a figure of quiet admiration. Her warmth turned his cold estate into a place of light. Her kindness softened even those who had once mocked her. Their wedding was held in the small chapel at Ravenshade Manor, beneath a vaulted ceiling where candles burned like 1,000 tiny suns. No grand assembly, no royal presence, only those who mattered, a handful of friends, his sister reconciled, and the vicar who had buried his grief years before. When she entered, wearing ivory silk trimmed with lace older than the century itself, the Duke's composure nearly failed him. She was radiant, not with youth, but with the calm assurance of a woman who had waited, endured, and finally been seen. When the vows were spoken, he turned to her with a voice that shook only once. "From this day," he said, "you are my peace." "And you," she replied, smiling through tears, "are my home." Outside, snow drifted in gentle spirals, covering the world in a hush so complete it felt like blessing. The bells rang out across the hills, carrying the sound of their union through the winter air. That night, as they stood before the hearth in their new home, the firelight caught the glint of her wedding band. He watched her for a long moment, then whispered, "You were the ballroom's forgotten gem. I should thank the years for leaving you untouched by vanity, else I might never have seen you at all." She leaned into him, her voice tender but firm. "Then let us thank the years together," she said. "They brought you back to life." And as the fire burned low and the snow fell steady beyond the windows, the Duke of Ravenshade, once the most feared man in London, held his Duchess in his arms, knowing that at last, he had found not only love, but redemption in the grace of the woman who had waited for neither. The tongue would speak for years of that unlikely union, calling her the Winter Duchess. Yet those who knew her well would say that winter had not claimed her, it had merely framed her like a diamond set against frost. For in her warmth, even the coldest heart of London had learned to thaw.